Every other pilot in Vietnam was killed from a distance. The jet pilot dropped his bombs from 10,000 feet and never saw what they did. The artillerymen fired from miles away at a grid reference on a map. Even the B-52 crew 30,000 feet up, pressing a button, turning for home. The Cobra pilot saw faces. He flew 200 feet off the ground at 170 miles per hour. And when he squeezed the trigger, he watched 4,000 rounds per minute turn human beings into something that wasn't human anymore. Then he pulled up, circled back, and did it again and again. And when it was done, his commander told him to fly lower and count what was left. The AH-1 Cobra was the first helicopter ever built with a single purpose: to kill, not transport troops. Do not evacuate the wounded, kill. And the men who flew it discovered that a machine designed purely for destruction does something to the person operating it that no amount of training prepares you for. This is that story. Here's the problem that created the Cobra. By 1965, when the Army's entire war strategy in Vietnam depended on helicopters, the AH-1 Huey, the iconic image of the whole conflict, was carrying troops into landing zones across the country: air cavalry, vertical envelopment. Bypass the jungle, land behind the enemy, fight on your terms. On paper, it was brilliant. In practice, the Huey was a flying coffin. The VC and NVA figured out the pattern fast. They'd let the Hueys commit to a landing zone, low, slow, maximum vulnerability, and open up from the tree line with everything they had. The transports had door gunners, sure, M60s hanging out in each side. But a Huey in a landing approach is an 8-foot wide target doing maybe 60 knots with its belly exposed. The math was ugly. Helicopters were being shot down faster than Bell could build them. The Army tried bolting weapons onto the Huey itself. Rocket pods, extra machine guns, armor plating, called them hogs. These gunship Hueys were supposed to escort the transports and suppress the landing zones before the slicks touched down. The problem was that once you hung all the ordnance on a utility helicopter, you killed its speed. A loaded hog couldn't keep up with the transports it was protecting. It was wider than a barn, slower than what it was escorting, and the side-mounted guns forced pilots to present their entire broadside to the enemy just to shoot. The Army needed something fundamentally different, not a transport with guns bolted on. A helicopter designed from scratch to do one thing. Bell Helicopter had already been thinking about this. In September 1965, test pilot Bill Quinlan took the Model 209 prototype up for 12 minutes and changed military aviation permanently. Bell had taken the Huey's engine, transmission, and rotor system, proven components, already in the supply chain, and wrapped them in a fuselage so narrow it barely looked like the same species. 36 and wide, a third the width of a Huey. The cockpit was tandem, gunner in front, pilot elevated behind him, so the aircraft could point its nose at you and you'd have almost nothing to shoot at. 220 miles per hour top speed. Stub wings for rockets and gun pods, and a chin-mounted turret that the gunner aimed by turning his head. Wherever he looked, the weapons followed. Less than 2 years from first flight to combat deployment. 6 Cobras arrived at Bien Hoa Air Base on August 30th, 1967. 5 days later, on September 4th, a Cobra crew destroyed a Viet Cong SAMP, first confirmed kill. The concept was validated before most of the Army knew the aircraft existed. By 1972, over 1,000 Cobras were operating in Vietnam simultaneously. They'd eventually logged more than 1 million flight hours in theater. But the numbers aren't what made the Cobra terrifying. The way it hunted is what made it terrifying. The deadliest tactic in the helicopter war was called the Pink Team. 1 small scout helicopter, the H-6CA, the Loach, and 1 Cobra. The Loach flew what pilots called low-level hell, 10 to 50 feet above the ground, skimming the elephant grass. The pilot was looking for signs of the enemy. Matted vegetation, cooking fires, footprints. Sometimes the smell of cigarettes drifts up through the canopy. And sometimes the Loach pilot deliberately drew fire, trolling, dangling himself as bait. The Cobra circled, 500 feet above, watching. The second the Loach took fire, the scout pilot popped smoke to mark the position and broke hard, and the Cobra rolled into a dive. What happened next took about 30 seconds. The pilot pushed the nose down and accelerated. The gunner locked the turret onto the smoke. At Clear's throat, the right moment, the rockets went to first. 2.75 enfolding fin aerial rockets, 7 or 19 per pod, slamming into the position with blast and fragmentation. Then the minigun opened up. The M134 minigun fired 6,000 rounds per minute in some configurations, 4,000 in the standard setting. That's 67 rounds every second. The individual shots came so fast that the human ear couldn't separate them. It didn't sound like a gun. Veterans on both sides described it the same way. A sound like someone ripping an enormous sheet of fabric. A deep, continuous tearing that meant everything in its path was being shredded. And then the Cobra pulled up, circled, and came back for another pass. And another. Unlike a jet screaming through at 500 knots and gone, the Cobra loitered. It stayed. It orbited overhead like something patient, waiting for movement, waiting for anyone still alive to make the mistake of running. NBA forces learned to dread the sound of that rotor. Military historian Peter Davies documented that enemy troops often refused to fire at scout helicopters specifically because they knew the Cobra was circling above waiting for the muzzle flash. The rational decision shoot down the thing buzzing your position became suicidal because of what was watching from 1,500 feet. That's not just a weapon. That's a predator that turned your own survival instincts against you. Shoot and you die? Don't shoot and the loach marks you anyway. Now, here's the part that the spec sheets don't cover what it was like inside the cockpit. The Cobra pilot wasn't pressing a button at 30,000 feet. He was flying 200 feet above the jungle, watching his rockets hit, watching the minigun rounds walk across a tree and watching people die. The gunner in the front seat was closer. He aimed the turret with his helmet, and his sight showed him exactly where each round landed. There was no abstraction, no distance, no somewhere down there. He saw it. Randy Jean, a Cobra pilot who wrote about his experience, described the transformation from, in his words, a naive middle-class teenager to a hardened killer. He talked about the kaleidoscope of emotions, fear, revenge, hate, and underneath all of it, a pity that never fully went away. Because the Cobra engaged at what he called eyeball level, and the results of a 4,000-round permit minigun burst on human flesh were something you couldn't unfocus your eyes from. And then there was the body count. After every engagement, crews were required to fly back over the target at low altitude and count the dead. This wasn't the pilot's idea. This was institutional, and the military's metrics-driven approach to measuring progress in a war where territory didn't change hands in any meaningful way. So, the men who had just killed from 200 feet were sent back down to 50 feet to verify what they'd done, to look at it, to put a number on it. And those numbers got passed up the chain where, according to Jean and others, officers routinely inflated them to advance their own careers. The pilots did the killing. The institution counted the dead and called it progress. And the young men in the cockpit, average age 19, 20, absorbed all of it. Some of them didn't survive what they absorbed. A pilot known only through his memoir pseudonym wrote about his bond with a specific aircraft. Old 340, the way another man might talk about a person he loved. He also wrote about a fellow pilot named Stockstill who came home from Vietnam and killed himself. The memoir doesn't diagnose, Stockstill doesn't need to. The connection between 12 months of loitering over kill zones and a quiet decision in a room back home is a line the reader draws on their own. During the Easter Offensive of '72, the NVA sent Soviet-supplied T-54 tanks across the border in a conventional invasion. Cobras had never been designed to fight armor. Nobody thought the NVA would use tanks in the jungle. At the Battle of Amlock, Cobra crews attacked the T-54s with rockets and 20mm cannon, weapons meant for bunkers and infantry, not heavy armor. They had to hit the same tank multiple times trying to take out the tracks or the optics. One crew, Major Larry McKay and Warrant Officer Barry McIntyre, put a heat rocket into a T-54 and blew the turret clean off. After that, NVA tank crews started abandoning their vehicles the moment Cobras appeared overhead. Colonel William Miller, senior advisor at Unlock, said it plainly. The Cobras were the instruments of our salvation. But the Cobra's precision was always conditional. In triple canopy jungle, from a moving aircraft at 170 miles per hour, the line between enemy, combatant, and civilian was sometimes invisible. Free fire zone policies told pilots that anything moving in a designated area was hostile. A Foreign Service officer in Sauk Province described repeatedly stopping Cobra pilots from engaging figures in black clothing. Standard VC attire, but also what every farmer in the Delta wore to work. The ones who got stopped didn't fire. The ones who didn't get stopped. That math belongs to a different ledger, and the numbers on it are uncertain because nobody in the institution wanted to keep that count. Over the course of the war, approximately 300 Cobras were destroyed. 247 crew members were killed. During the Lamson 719 operation alone, 8 weeks in early 71, 26 Cobras were destroyed and 158 damaged. That's not attrition. That's a meat grinder that chewed through aircraft faster than the supply chain could replace them. And the men who flew those missions and walked away carried it differently than anyone else in the war because their weapon wasn't a rifle you fired and put down. It was a machine they lived inside, bonded with, named, and relied on. And that machine's sole function was killing at a proximity close enough to see what killing looked like. The Cobra proved that attack helicopters worked. Every gunship that came after it, the Apache, the Viper, the Russian Havoc, all of them borrowed from the 36 inches fuselage and the tandem cockpit and the chin turret that a test pilot took up for 12 minutes in 1965. It changed warfare permanently. But the men who proved the concept, the ones who flew 1,000,000 hours at treetop level, who watched their rockets land, who counted bodies because the system told them to, who came home and heard rotor blades in their sleep for the next 50 years. They didn't change warfare. Warfare changed them. And most of them are in their 70s now, still hearing.